Let me get into character, guys.
Oh, guys,
That's
that's
lovely.
Yeah,
It's pretty lovely.
we entered a flow state.
Yeah. Good day, everyone. My name is Amani, and I'm here today with Ronali and Tharshi. Welcome to the That's So Psych podcast. And we are actually here today to discuss something very interesting for this segment. We are here to discuss something that affects all of us, and you may not even realize it. And it's actually conformity, group pressure, and social identity. The field of psychology has spent decades trying to understand how our thinking is shaped by the individuals that surround us. Why do our thinking behaviors change depending on the group that we identify with? Why do our ideologies become more extreme when we're surrounded by like-minded individuals? Why do some people follow bad behavior even when they know that group is wrong? So we're actually here to answer those questions and unpack them through very interesting psychological concepts like social identity theory, conformity experiments, and I'm sure all of you know these concepts: cancel culture, online communities, and of course the manosphere. So let's start broad. When you hear the phrase, people shape who we are, what comes to mind?
So for me, it's that we don't really create our own identity solely by ourselves. I mean, I think the earliest versions of ourselves are created either by the language we learn, or it could be the culture that we are brought into, the values that we learn from a certain culture. It could be the expectations that our parents set up on us, and so basically we kind of adapt into certain roles. It could be, roles like being the peacekeeper or being the responsible one, being the quiet one. And I think people around us create that first template that we dwell ourselves into, that we shape ourselves into. So that is my understanding of the phrase people shape who we are.
So you would say that it's sometimes subtle.
It's very subtle.
Yeah. So sometimes when it comes to groups and the influence of groups, you might not even realize that you're being influenced. So there might not be per se an external pressure on you. It might not always be overt. It could be very covert. And so take for an example, if you are entering a new workspace, you've got a new job and you're entering a new space, it mostly depends on the atmosphere and also the groups that are already established. So even going in there without a rule book in your head, you might still figure out who to avoid, who to approach, what type of language you should use, what type of humor is accepted, what thoughts are better kept to yourself, right? So it's not always going to be someone pressurizing you. Sometimes you might not even realize that it's happening. So that's the funny thing, or that's the very interesting thing about group influence. Like even when you said sometimes parents shape us, we might not realize because it's been happening for a long time.
So it can be a both unconscious and conscious process.
Yes.
That's actually interesting. So it brings us actually to our first psychological concept, which is social identity theory, right? So social identity theory basically says that a big part of our identity comes from the group that we belong to. We are not really just an individual. We are women, we are a daughter, we are a Sri Lankan, we could be a football fan, or we could be a Swiftie for all we know, right? So whatever it may be, or whatever group we belong to, right? It's shaped by, our identities are shaped by the individuals that we mainly align and surround ourselves with, right? So once we start identifying with a group, it basically starts influencing the way we think, the way we behave, the way we talk, the way we interact with other people, right? So what do you think is powerful about this theory, Ronali? I would love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, when you find yourself in a community, when you identify yourself with a group, if any comments pass upon that group, you say any criticism, you take that criticism personally. And that's why I find group memberships to be so powerful. And we always, when we are in a group, there is no I and them. They sort of merge together. You become an us. when you get into a group.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
I think even if the groups are arbitrary, people still favor those groups over any other personal factor. So that's what I really like. Then we start to get less neutral about our feelings towards the group, and we defend them aggressively. We become loyal to that specific community.
Yeah. Good. Tarshi, what about your thoughts?
So yeah, I agree with her. It's, if we put it simply, it's safety in numbers. It's a very, like, I would say, a very biological thing, a very evolutionary thing. Like, let's say for like thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, it might have been tribes. Now it's online communities, fandoms. You have wellness groups, fitness groups. Everyone belongs somewhere or wants to belong somewhere. So these groups, you don't just consume their content, you sometimes become the content, and you sometimes advocate for it, and like you said, defend, fight for it. So it might even, like, being a part of a group might give you a script on how to think, how to act. You might change your behavior as well. So what I think.
So the question actually becomes not who am I, but who am I with?
Yeah.
Or who am I going to go against with my community?
Right. Is it my belief, or is it the belief that keeps me accepted where I am? Yeah.
That's very true.
That's actually interesting too, and I want to add something to that. Is there is also the way that our behavior changes based on the roles that other people assign us. Like, people think that our personalities change only in extreme settings, but it also happens in, like, your workplace. So I have seen, in a workplace, usually they assign people these unspoken roles, the funny one, the quiet one, or the organized one. And you will see, okay, if they want something to be, let's say, a party to be organized, they will immediately go towards the organized person to get their help. Yeah. If someone wants to, like, have a chat with someone, they immediately go to, like, the therapy friend. So naturally, these roles just become and shape, like, who you are, and that is the role you play in that particular setting. And I feel like that also really changes our behavior, because these roles change depending on the setting that we are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that links back to what I just said earlier.
Labeling.
Labeling. When you think of people shaping who you are, because you want to perform to that identity that they set out for you. And I think down the line, you won't be able to separate who you actually are from what people expect of you. And that is where your social self becomes self-reinforcing. So then it's more or less a journey where you want to see if you should take things out of that template that was set out for you, whether you should outgrow them, if you should take something in. And
Right. So I think the main, if anyone wants to take away something from this podcast, it should be identifying those things that make you, your beliefs your own. How to, think critically and sort of define your beliefs from a group's belief. Kind of develop that self-awareness. Yeah.
Great, guys. That actually wraps up social identity, like, pretty neatly. And now let's move on to my personal favorite, social pressure and conformity, which is a aspect of social pressure, right? So the most famous, I would say, something that we've learned from our very early modules is Asch's conformity experiments. And for those who don't know, Asch's conformity experiments was essentially an experiment where people were given line comparisons. They were told to pick what is the shortest line or what is the longest line. But when a group deliberately picked the wrong answer, even the participant ended up picking the wrong answer because everyone else picked it. Even though they knew that the answer was wrong, they still conformed to what everyone else chose. Now, Tarshi, why do you think that this study matters in this day and age, and how much do you think it matters?
Well, if we were to talk about Asch's experiment, it was a very, I think it's interesting and a little bit disturbing because of how simple the setup was. Even when we first learned about it, I was like, no way something this simple could trick someone. So what actually happened during the experiment was there was, in room, there was roughly around 6 men. 5 of these men were actors in Asch's experiment. 1 was a real subject. So this subject had no idea that this was an experiment, right?
Absolutely no.
Absolutely no clue. So in this room, it would be the 6 men, including the real world subject, 5 actors, and an experimenter with a board showing lines. So what it was, on the left there was like this example line, and on the right there were 3 lines, 3 different sizes. Only one matched the line on the left.
Right.
So basically what the men had to do was gauge which line on the right matched the line on the left in terms of length.
Okay.
So there was only one answer. So let's say the first example line was this. So this is clearly the answer, right? The second one would be this long, and the third one would be like this, right? So the 5 actors were told to deliberately lie, give the wrong answer on certain trials. All right. So the first 2 trials went really smoothly. Everyone was giving the right answer. And on the third trial is where it gets interesting. So the answer, let's say the answer is clearly 1. Everyone was saying 2, 2, 2. And when it got to the real subject, let's call him subject A. Subject A kind of looked around. He was confused. He knew the answer was 1, right?
Yeah.
But he answered 2. Something as simple, something so obvious that you see, right?
Because he didn't want to be different.
He did. But when they conducted an individual interview afterwards with him, he said it was because, it was 4 people against 1, so they must have been right. So he actually believed that the group was right because in numbers they were higher.
So he actually doubted his own thinking.
He doubted his own thinking. But then there was subject B. Subject B knew something was wrong. So everyone was giving the wrong answer. Answer 2, answer 2, answer 2. He was like, no, answer 1. And he kept going. But on like the 3rd or 4th try, he gave the wrong answer. And he kept giving the wrong answer. And when he was individually interviewed, he said that, I knew they were wrong, but I didn't want to cause a wave.
Right.
So he didn't want to be different. He didn't want to go through that, discomfort of being the odd one out. So 2 different things. One, believed that the group was right. The other knew it was wrong, but he still went.
Right.
And there were different variations that were added. I think when they were alone, when the real world subject was alone, they made up to 37% errors. And then they were given a partner, another actor. This time the actor had to agree with it. So they gave the right answer. When you had a partner, you were more likely to give your right answer, and you were less likely to make errors. So errors dropped from 37% to 5% when you had a partner.
Just one singular.
Just one person supporting you.
Okay.
So that really shows that it's not just the number of people in a group, it's also how unanimous the group is. And if you can punch a hole through that unanimity with just one person, it could, collapse the whole thing. And there's another interesting variation where the participant, the real world person, was told that because he came late, he has to jot down the answers and not say it out loud.
Okay.
So when he was given the option of participant C, let's call him, when he was given the option of jotting down the answer, he wrote the right answer because he didn't have to say it out loud. Right.
So his opinion was not voiced out to a crowd.
Yeah. So he was more likely to give his honest opinion. So that it shows a very nice range of how this works. It's so complex. It's never one.
It's never one reason.
Yeah. I think that's what's most interesting about Asch's experiment.
In Asch's experiment, actually, if you take conformity bias as a concept, the 2 subjects showed 2 types of conformity biases. So one is normative influence, which I think was done by subject A or B?
Subject B.
B. So he actually disagreed because he didn't want to be left out of that whole group, and that is going along with the crowd because you don't want to be left out. But then subject A showed something what we call is informative influence, which is where you actually start to doubt your own ability, your own thinking patterns, because a group collectively agrees on something different to you. So we can't really say that conformity bias is just, loosely agreeing to a fake agreement because a group unanimously thinks one different way. It's very complex, like you said, Tarashi. There's so many layers. It actually can change our thinking pattern so drastically.
Yeah. Right. And with normative and informative like conformity, right? It's really scary when you apply it to the modern day and age, because you can see it more now in social media essentially, because that is our main form of communication. You can see it on Instagram, on TikTok, on X, which was, lastly known as Twitter, RIP. So me personally, I notice when, let's say, you hear about a situation, right, and you have a particular opinion on it based on your own schemas in your head and whatnot. You go and watch a video about the situation, and then you see and read the comments, right? You start questioning your own thinking. It just occurs naturally. You're like, wait a second, am I not informed enough to have an opinion on this particular situation? Do I have this opinion of this particular situation and be different? Will I be wrong? Will I be, excluded from society? Like, that's basically how we think, because as human beings, we want to be a part of a group for survival. That's just how evolutionary, we have been built, right? So I feel like conformity is a little bit of a dangerous concept when it comes to the modern day and age, right? What do you think?
It is. And especially because it's not just your opinion. Nowadays with social media, the algorithm is also shaping your whatever content that you see, right? So let's say, even if your phone is kept aside and you talk about something, you realize when you open Instagram or X or Reddit, something that you just talked about will pop up on your For You page, right? And then the next probably 10 to 15 videos is going to be on that topic. So that's pretty scary, because that's when you think your perception starts to become reality, because everything that you're seeing is kind of aligning with what you already talked about or what you already know.
True.
So yeah.
Right. And that actually brings me to one of my very favorite things to talk about, which is cancel culture and groupthink. So for those of you who don't know, just to describe what groupthink is, it's essentially when your desire for group harmony basically impacts the way you think. So your thinking becomes part of the group. You don't even think individually, you just naturally align with what the group thinks, right? So how do you think we can connect that to, the very famous cancel culture? Ronali.
So cancel culture, if you think about it, it's more like an accelerated group thing. Because before you can even form a
Opinion
about it, there's already a group out there who has taken a moral stance, and they're basically feeding the information, and you just have to passively take it in.
Yes.
And then you're looking out for ideas, and you're looking out for any kind of information that aligns with that idea that the group has already, social media has already put out there. And if there's anything that challenges it, you do you think it's something that is irrelevant, or it's incorrect, or it's PR? So that is very scary.
Yeah.
Think about it.
True.
On the longer run.
It's like herd mentality almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So social media definitely does intensify this, because it's all about rewards. So you get rewarded for giving, let's say some situation comes up, you have to be the first to speak. You have to be accurate, you have to be speedy, you have as accurate as you can get with little to no context. And so sometimes people don't even have the full story, but they already have to pick and choose, okay, which opinion am I supporting and to which degree? Because it's like, if I don't say something on it, I might as well just agree with the thing that I don't want to agree. So that's why it gets scary for people. So you're not rewarded for saying, I'd like to sit with this for a while and think about it and then give my idea. So by the time the context comes, people have already moved on. Or they've dug themselves deeper.
I think you can't even ask about the situation, because people
need to know.
Yes, because people would sort of interpret it as you being disloyal to their whole
Ideology.
Yeah, exactly. So
then you're uneducated on them.
Yeah. And I think a really interesting example of this group dynamic for me, I think, is the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case. I have never seen the internet so 50-50 divided between two people. I feel like that was a huge scenario that occurred for a long period of time, and there were a huge group of people that were canceling Johnny Depp, a huge group of people that were canceling defending Amber Heard, and both of them said that they were experiencing like daily harassment, death threats, like even personal like letters sent to their house, threatening their families and stuff like that. And I feel like their public discourse was so memeified by both like both groups, and they were just like fighting each other like constantly, so I don't know, that was honestly one of the craziest cases that I saw with this whole group discourse and groupthink sort of.
Definitely very memorable.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically became a spectacle for us to observe and comment on. And what's interesting is that you would see people commenting so, like you said, they face daily harassment, and you would see such crude and such vile comments about them, but you would never have the courage to do it in person to another person and in person. But it's because that everyone in society was collectively throwing, fireballs at them. You just started to decide to go with the crowd, and it became acceptable.
Yeah. So what was fed to you the most, you ended up aligning with that. The more evidence you saw towards each side, you ended up aligning with that particular side. Like I would see people in the comments fighting each other, like, why would you align with and why would you align with this person because of this reason? And it was like, whoa, you don't even know the situation here,
So it shows how public opinion, it can be contagious. And the whole situation was wild because there were certain people who had no clue what was going on. They were not following up with any of the court proceedings. But they were still jumping into the ship because they wanted to make the best memes. They wanted to be, come up with new ways to mock them. And it was just a wave of hate and memes and mockery. And people just went along with it because that was the popular opinion.
And I think your sense of responsibility just decreased during that time. People just took they just advocated for what they think they should go for.
Yes.
It's interesting how responsibility goes down when there's more members.
Yeah, that's so true, because I feel like a very similar situation, I think more recent, is the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni situation. Oh my god, people were so quick to form a public narrative about each individual. And I feel like I saw a lot of hatred towards Blake Lively. Like there were a lot of allegations that it was a smear campaign. There were a lot of hatred towards her products, and people were just going at it. And one thing about groupthink, and I noticed, is this, like I said, herd mentality, right? It gets to a point that it becomes so extreme. Like you said, with the threats and the harassment, it also goes to a point where they try to ruin every aspect of the individual's life just for the satisfaction of agreeing with their opinion or agreeing with the group opinion. Doxing is one thing, ruining a brand of a person is one thing, and it's just so scary, in my opinion, right?
It's so scary how people can do something like that when they're safe in numbers.
In those cases, you don't really form an independent judgment. You kind of absorb the emotional reaction of the crowd.
It might be that
and that's very psychologically interesting.
True.
And when you emotionally invest in a narrative like that, it's really hard to come out of it or revise it or correct yourself, because you're seeing everything and you're part of one part of a feed, and your algorithm is also suggesting videos that align with your thoughts. So you're basically confirming what you already know, and you've decided in your head, okay, this is the villain. And so even if more details of the story gets released, you've already made up your mind, and that part that disagrees with what you already know, it gets dismissed or ignored.
Yeah, and so that's called confirmation bias, right? Which leads us perfectly to another very interesting concept, which is the manosphere. So now, for those of you who don't know, this is essentially a network of online communities that partake in discussions on anti-feminist culture, or I'm sure a lot of you know something called red pill content. And what makes this relevant to our topic is not just the content of what they're discussing or whatever, but it's about the repeated exposure towards this content, right? So, Ronali, what do you think about being repeatedly exposed to a particular type of content?
I think with more repeated exposure, you sort of take it in as the default explanation for anything in your life. I mean, for instance, if you take majority of Sri Lanka back in the day, you would see that women were more, I mean, I wouldn't say forced, but they were expected to stay at home, not work in corporate offices or work out there. I mean, do jobs. They were just the homemaker while the men were the breadwinners. But and it's not that it was only until very recently that people started challenging it. But we know back in the day, you can't really blame someone for expecting to be in that role. It's just that they thought that was the way their life is supposed to be.
Yeah.
So you don't, I think, with the whole repeated exposure like concept that we're talking about, you think that this is your reality, that this is the truth that you're supposed to live with.
Yeah. So what's dangerous about that is that it could be dangerous. The group doesn't just give you a belief, it gives you an identity.
Right.
It tells you who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to say, who you're supposed to be against, who has wronged you. And in most cases, it's not the fact that you have actually been wronged by someone. It could be that it hasn't happened yet. But since all this content is telling you that this is going to happen if you don't, tough up, you kind of, as a protection method, you kind of sort of prepare yourself. And that's where this overexposure, constant exposure, it gets into your head, like you say. And that's where the line between reality and someone else's perception that is constantly fed to you, that line gets blurred. And I think that's how people in these spheres kind of entice people, because let's say you're someone who's very isolated. Even in school, you were pushed aside. Even at work, you're overworked, you don't have many friends, so you're basically a very isolated person, or you could have mental health issues. So a person like this being exposed to content like this, they are the type of people to get pulled in because they're searching for that belonging.
So it's
I want to be a part of a group.
Right. So it's not just about the sexism also. It's just about
it could be
wanting
about
to be part of like a bigger group.
Right. So even a harmful ideology like that could fulfill your emotional needs.
Right.
So and it basically gives you an answer, because if you think as human beings, what we fear most is the unknown, right? So when there's something that's giving you structure, it's giving you support, it's telling you you're important, you're special. Yes, you're special. Yes, you're important. But there's a moment in time where this ideology starts to hurt you. It starts to potentially hurt the people around you. That's when you need to kind of, take a seat back, and we say, touch some grass, right? Do a little bit of introspection.
I think we have to be really careful, because we can't really assume that. I mean, very rarely people actually adopt those extreme beliefs overnight. You don't just change your thought process just because someone made an argument that challenges your beliefs. And you have to understand that when you are constantly when you're constantly exposed to such content and you question them, you're also questioning the community that actually made you feel understood. And
that's a good point. So it's a dilemma. This is the place that finally made you feel safe, and now everyone is telling you this is bad for you, this is bad for someone else, right? So you need to, that's why I think critical thinking is very important. You need to do your own research, and not just go off based off of what someone tells you. Yeah, that's how you kind of develop that your introspection.
That's honestly, guys, both of you have like amazing points. So we're gonna wrap this section up actually, and let me just tie this in together, right? So just because to give everyone sort of a few different perspectives and to help you understand the layers to how and why we behave this way, right? So let's look at it like in the biological standpoint. Humans have been wired evolutionary for survival to connect with other people, right? So it is when we feel rejected, excluded, or when we stand out from a group, we do not just feel emotionally or like physically uncomfortable. It almost feels threatening, like we are not safe, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like it also rewards our brain pathways to just align with people who are similar to us. And, you know, we can care about one particular thing without having to like think outside the box, which is where people feel unsafe. Right? And then when we say psychologically, from a psychological standpoint, we crave like certainty and like a stable sense of self. Being part of a group gives you an idea of who you are as a person, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't to constantly question who you are as a person could leave a human very frightened. It could leave them vulnerable, you know. And when you're part of a group, like the group tells you what's wrong and what's right. So sometimes, you know, you don't have to think individually. So that's where like groupthink comes in and conformity. When it comes from a social perspective, I feel like we are shaped by the things around us and we don't even notice our family, our culture, our religion. Whenever we grow up with these particular things, it quietly builds who we are as a person, you know. And then we meet other people and you're like, oh, you grew up that way, like I grew up this way, and it's like almost like a culture shock, especially when we go from one country to another and they're like behaving a particular way in a particular setting. You're like, wait a second, you know, because I recently learned that apparently like abroad countries, it's not a common thing to feed the birthday cake to everyone.
Really?
Yeah.
In some cultures, you feed the first slice to the person you love the most.
Yes, exactly. And
Whereas in our
we culture feed everyone.
I mean, you start with the head of the family.
Yeah. But apparently, like in Western cultures, that's not a practice at all. Like no one feeds the birthday cake to her. It's like just they cut it and like that's about it. So which I find interesting, right? So yeah. So before we completely wrap this section up, are there any final takeaways from each of you?
So if we have to go back to about conformity, I don't want to, I think because we mostly talk about how negative it is, we can't really treat it as a weakness or as a flaw, because that's really unfair.
Yeah.
What we should do is be aware that there is such concepts and that we, and consciously and unconsciously, we can adapt some thinking, like, you know, we can adapt some bias into our thinking patterns.
Some thinking is good.
Yeah, it is good.
Exactly.
And what we should know is how we should kind of know whether agreeing with part of a group or just knowing whether we are adapting that certain community's thinking patterns would expand our judgment, or would it replace our whole mentality altogether.
Yeah. And it can be a very scary process. And what you need to remember is it's very human. It's very human to want to belong. It's very human to want these things.
Yes.
But what you should have, like Pranali said, is awareness. Be aware that your thoughts, your behaviors, and sometimes even your emotional reactions can be influenced. Just have that awareness that exists. And like you said, sometimes you experience shocks, like culture shocks. That's what in psychology we call it cognitive dissonance. It's basically a resistance in your brain to new information that your brain is not used to. You've never heard of it because you grew up a certain way with certain information, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't change overnight, and it doesn't have to change overnight. You just need to do a bit of research and introspection and have that awareness and develop your perception.
I love that. So now the takeaway from this section entirely is our identity is not formed in a vacuum. Our identity is a fragment of the narratives we consume, the people we surround ourselves with, the way we are brought up. But what's important is we are able to take a little step back, think a little about what we consume, especially in social media, to be able to form our own opinions that would eventually form your own social identity. Because at the end of the day, you are special. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the That's So Psych podcast. Thank you, Ronali. Thank you, Tharshi. This was honestly really interesting, and I can't wait to dive into more interesting topics. So join us soon for our next episode. Bye.